Alright, Namaste everyone and welcome back to the course on time series analysis and forecasting, going from a noob to a pro. Right? In the last video, we saw different examples of time series and we built an intuition of what time series is, and then later we formally defined the concept of time series, right? We understood the essence of what time series data is and why it is different from regular data sets, right? In this video, we will take that concept a little further and, break down time series into its different components and try to understand it even further. In this video, we will see what makes up a time series, right? What are the different components that you should look out for when looking at a time series for analysis or forecasting. So let's get started. Awesome. Alright, so brief recap of what we saw in the last video. So this is again the example that we saw of airline passengers. So let's discuss this data set for once, right? So what we can see here is that there are values, which is the passengers, that are plotted against time, which is the years, right? So values plotted against time. Then we can see that overall there has been a growth, right? So overall there is a growth. Then another peculiar thing that we noticed last time was that there is a pattern that repeats year on year, right? The same kind of pattern repeats every year, right? And which is also the time dependence of the values. And we will understand this, don't worry, right? So this is how we came up with a definition of our time series, right? So time series is a set of real values that are plotted against time, right? So now let's understand what different components of the time series are. So you can try to understand them as different building blocks of a time series data set, right? So here is a list of the major components. They are trend, seasonality, cyclicity or cyclicality, irregularities, and level. These are very important and fundamental concepts of a time series, which we must understand before doing any kind of analysis or forecasting exercises, right? So let's understand them one by one. The trend. Now trend refers to the long-term increase or decrease in the time series over time. In simpler words, if the time series looks like this, if there is a growth overall, we will say that the trend is upwards or uptrend, right? If the time series looks like this, then we will see that there is a downward trend or downtrend. And there may be some data sets where there is neither an uptrend nor an downtrend. So we could say that there is no trend, right? Or consolidation. Okay, here is an example of the stock prices of Apple. So you can see that there is steady growth and then a very sharp growth. So almost like an exponential growth. So this is example of an uptrend. Okay, the second component, seasonality. Now seasonality refers to the periodic variations that occur at specific and regular intervals, right? So when we saw in the airline passengers dataset that while the dataset was increasing, but we saw year on year there was a repeating pattern, right? It was looking like this, somewhat like this, right? So if on similar months there was similar growths and downfalls as well, right? So seasonality is occurred in less than a year, right? So like how different seasons occur in the same months of a year, similar to that concept, right? So time series is influenced by seasonal factors. It could be quarter, it could be month, it could be week, or even time of a day, right? So seasonality is always fixed and a known period, usually less than a year. So this is very important, that seasonality is a fixed and known period, right? So we know that the pattern will occur in so many months or so many days or so many hours, so to say. So here let's understand it further with some examples. So we all know that ice cream sales will always go up in summers, right? And always go down in winter. So it will look something like this. If this is here, so it will go up, then go down, go up, then go down, go up, then go down, right? So this would be your May, June, July summers, and this would be your winters, right? Again, second example, visitors to a hill station increases in summers and decreases in winters, of course, right? Then footfall in markets and malls are higher on weekends. Well, yes. So if this is week on week data, so footfall or number of visitors would look something like this, right? And you can think of so many examples where you can notice that there is an increase or decrease in a certain interval. And I would love for you to think about it, think about examples that you see in your daily life, and also mention them in the comments so that everyone can learn from each other. Again, so let's solidify with another example. So what we learned was that seasonality is a repeating pattern across known intervals and fixed intervals. Well, we can see that little increase, little drop, bigger increase, bigger drop, then little increase, little drop, bigger increase, bigger drop. Year on year, and the same months, the same kind of pattern is repeating itself, right? So this is the concept of seasonality. Okay, cyclicality. Now, a lot of people confuse seasonality and cyclicality or cyclicity, and a lot of people also think that these both concepts are same, but they're not. There is a very subtle difference between seasonality and cyclicality, and we should understand the difference between both, right? So while seasonality exists when a series is influenced by seasonal patterns, which is less than a year, right? However, a cyclic pattern occurs for periods usually greater than 2 years, right? So cyclicality is a repeated pattern in time series observed over larger time periods, right? And these periods also may or may not be fixed. They are greater than 2 years and may or may not be fixed intervals, right? This repeating pattern may or may not occur over fixed intervals. For example, business cycles. So what the concept of business cycle is that every business goes through its ups and lows periodically over many years, right? And this happens over like 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. It could happen anytime, but you cannot exactly time it, right? You cannot exactly time it, and it may happen either after 4 years, then the next cycle may happen after 6 years, but it usually happens. And this is what the concept of business cycle is, right? A rise and fall of stock markets due to elections, right? Elections happen every 5 years, and every 5 years there is either a sharp rise or a sharp downfall because of change in government, right? So the stock prices change heavily with the change in governments, right? Dips due to recessions. Okay, recession also repeats itself in 8 to 10 years. Recession repeats over time, right? And this cannot be predicted, but it happens over the range of 8 to 10 years, right? So this is again a example of cyclicality or cyclicity. Now let's see an example of cyclicity. The number of lynx trapped in Australia. So this was the data recorded of lynx. This is lynx, sort of a wild cat, right, in Australia. So their occurrences. So you can see that here. So if this is 1830, this would be 1828 or something. Then the sharp increase happens here. So if this is 70, this could be 66. Then again it happens here, maybe 95. 1905. because this is 10, right? So you can see that the pattern repeats: big followed by 3 small peaks, then big, then followed by 3 small peaks, then again big followed by 3 small peaks. But it happens over a large period of time, usually greater than 2 years, and not fixed, may or may not be fixed, right? So this is the concept of cyclicity or cyclicality. So a quick note here on the importance of cyclicity. You know why we should factor in cyclicity into our modeling process, especially when the data spans over multiple years. First, you can see the data spans from 1820 to 1920. That's almost 100 years. And there are multiple occurrences of cyclical patterns. So imagine if we had data only from here to here, about 20-25 years long data. Training our model on this data, our model would have made forecast for the next cycle that would have looked something like this, right? And it is totally missing the mark from the true values, right? Which is why it is important for our model to also read cyclical data so our forecast can be more accurate, right? Alright, let's continue. Another example. This kind of pattern is repeating over many years. So let's summarize the difference between seasonality and cyclicality. The time period in seasonality is governed by the calendar, right? And it is usually less than 1 year, the interval or the time period. Whereas in cyclicality, it is not governed by the calendar, and it is greater than 2 years. And here the duration, it could be either different seasons, different quarters, months, weeks, or it could be hours, it could be anything, right? And here the duration is usually more than 2 years. Alright, so by now we've seen 3 components of the time series, right? So these were the trend, which is the overall growth or downfall; seasonality, which is the repeating pattern in a fixed interval and shorter period of time. Then there was cyclicality, which was repeating pattern over large periods of time, right? And now irregularities. So what is irregularities? Let's get into this. So irregularities can be understood in this way. So imagine you have your time series, right? If you remove your trend from this, what would be left? This. Then if you remove your repeating pattern from this, what would be left is this, right? And now what is left is a very unpredictable random pattern, right? Very unpredictable. It has no trend, it has no repeating pattern. Nothing can be predicted out here, right? So this is irregularities, right? So let's see. Unpredictable random irregularities are present in almost all time series. And why is this important, right? Because the effect of noise on time series forecast becomes important to quantify for accurate prediction, right? Irregularities is also known as noise, and we must account this while considering all the components of a time series for making accurate predictions. Now, these are the popular types of irregularities. One is noise, right? So the noise in a transmitting signal, errors or residuals. So when you remove the different components from a time series, what is left is the residual, right? Then outliers, anomalies, or random holidays or random event that impacts the time series. For example, a random trend that picks up on a social media might impact the sales of a particular event, right? So these kind of random events, types of irregularities. Now let's see. So consider this example of stock prices. While we can see that there is overall growth over the years and there is very negligible repeating pattern, what if we decompose this, right? So this is the decomposition of time series. And don't worry, we will look into this later in a lot of detail. But what this means is to separate the different components. So separate the trend, seasonality, cyclicality, and see every component individually. So while this is the original time series, this is the trend of this time series, which is the overall growth. This is the seasonality. You see that there is some seasonality, very negligible. And why do I say negligible? Because of the range. See, you see that it ranges from +5 to -10, whereas the total time series ranges from somewhere here to even greater than 10,000, right? So when you compare this range with this range, this is very negligible. So if you remove trend, if you remove seasonality, what is left is this random pattern, which is happening randomly. These are what you call as residuals or irregularities. These are random patterns and they cannot be predicted. Okay, a very popular type of noise is called the white noise, right? And we will study this in detail, but this is what it looks like. A random pattern with no trend whatsoever. Then another irregularity, a very popular one, is called the random walk or random walk noise. This is a time series that happens randomly, right? You cannot predict whether it's going to go up or down in the next step. It cannot be predicted. So now we have seen trend, we've seen seasonality, we've seen cyclicalities, we've seen different kinds of irregularities. Now the final major component of a time series is the level. Now what is level? Level is the average value of the time series. Simple, right? So when you remove all other components from a time series, what is left is called the level. It is the base level. So if this is the level, this is the earth or ground, right? And you keep stacking floors over floors, you create a skyscraper, right? So this is exactly what level is. This is the baseline where you add maybe say trend, then you add a seasonal component, right? Then you add some residuals, then you add some other minor component. It all adds up and results in a time series, right? So it is the baseline on which a time series is built upon, right? So it is called level. Now let's see the relationship between components of time series. How in the last slide we saw the example of different components coming up to build a time series over the level, right? So let's see what the relationship is. Now we've achieved the levels, the baseline, by removing the trend, seasonality and other components from the time series. Therefore, it makes sense that combining these individual components would give us back the original time series, right? So let's see. These are some of the different combinations that can give you back the time series. So the first one is level plus trend plus seasonality equals time series, right? Then similarly, level multiplied by trend multiplied by seasonality gives you back the time series, or a different permutation and combination of these two operators could give you back the time series, right? So these are some of the popular combinations. Since this is all additions, it is called an additive combination. And since these are all multiplications, this one is called multiplicative time series, right? Additive process, multiplicative process where everything gets multiplied. Additive process is where everything gets added up, and a combination could be a permutation combination of both the operators. Let's summarize everything that we have studied so far. We've seen some of the major components of time series that come together to build up a time series, right? So let's go backwards. So level is the baseline, right? And when you stack all the different components on level, you get back the time series. So the components are trend, which is the overall growth or downfall or no growth, right? So or no trend. Seasonality is the repeating pattern over short-term seasonal patterns, short-term intervals. Cyclicalities is the repeating pattern over long-term intervals. Irregularities are different components that add unpredictability or randomness to the time series. And level Of course, when you remove everything from the time series, what is left is the level. Right, so this marks the end of this discussion. Hope you enjoyed it. If you like the video, share it with someone whom you feel it will be helpful, and leave your feedback below. If you have any queries, leave them in the comment section and I will get back to you. Also, I encourage you to try and help each other out in the comment section and try and resolve each other's queries as well. Let's help each other out. Alright, until next time, I hope you have a good time. Namaste.